nutshell, we broke down this false personality, or this concept of false personality, or concept of the imagined self, yeah, where we start the work from, and what we are trying to liberate ourselves from. We learn some tools, the self-observation, being present, self-remembering, having more frequency of this. We know about the centers. And then we got into, okay, so each ego comes in certain flavors, and these are comprised by the what's called the chief feature, chief tendency of mechanicality. And so in the fourth way, we are encouraged to find out what our chief feature, or which are our primary 2 or 3 features, because if we don't know them, we are them, and then the whole show perpetuates itself. So obviously it's very important, and I get it from you that some of you realize, man, this is very important. Yeah, so what I wanted to say straight off the bat is that it's more useful to look at the ego or false personality, or this, not to look at it it's a something, it's not a something. Even this chief feature is not like a something, it's not a something, it's an activity. Even the ego is not a something, the ego is an activity of the consciousness being confused and believing to be the mind and the body, and feeling separate and thrown at sea with big waves, and therefore we're trying to be safe and to avoid, to manage, to control. Yeah, so these are all chief kind of flavors of this chief feature, ego. It's more, so it's important to look at it as an activity rather than a something, and to not try to eradicate it or to get too heroic in imagining that, okay, I need to eradicate this feature. And so yeah, I would like to open our discussing here, Peter. Okay, so once you discover, you hear about these ideas. Also, I notice some of us, we hear about these ideas, and then there's this tendency, which I guess is natural, but it's tricky, to now go for all our life and be like, oh, wow, I had this in my 20s, there was this and that. And so reevaluating or reanalyzing our whole life from the point of view of the and analyzing what feature was playing in my 20s, in my 30s, in my 40s. And so although it's natural to now reevaluate one's life from this point of view, yeah, I would like to have some healthy, clean foundation on working with this. So my question, maybe I'll ask Peter some questions here on behalf of our group. So once you know about this, and once you identify certain features in oneself, and then you discover other ones, and what is the work? What does it mean to do work on oneself as we notice this feature? And what would be some right understanding to tackle this? And what would be some traps, like what not to do? One of them will be this secondary negativity of I'm catching myself in vanity and beating myself up about it, or catching myself controlling or beating myself about it. Yeah, how to go about this in a way that it starts to bring more freedom rather than more mentalization.
Thank you. Listening to your description there brought to mind a couple of things. One, one of the pitfalls, usually for everyone, is to jump into analysis of chief feature, and as opposed to just what Ouspensky and Gurdjieff call just recording, simply recording. It's interesting that when we really start to observe ourselves, we cannot do it objectively. As soon as we observe, we have an evaluation. It's either we see good things, we see bad things. And then, as Ouspensky said, we tend to think the things that we like, which we see, we think are our true self. And the things we don't like, we think are our false personality, and we attribute it to chief feature. We don't see that both actually can fall into the camp of false personality, imaginary I, chief feature. Even the fact that when I came in and I heard Deb made the comment, every time I try to be good, it turns out bad. It's that same idea. I'm trying to be a good person. I'm a good person. That can actually be a characteristic of chief feature. So to not try to, and the reason I say not analyze and observe is because this is a multi-layered phenomenon we're talking about. And the way I think of it is there are 3 layers of false personality, which is a manifestation of chief feature, our behavior. So there's our external behavior, how we manifest in relation to the world and other people, yes? And this is what we see first when we start observing this idea of chief feature. We see all these manifestations and we think that's it. And actually, that's not even it. That's the result. And it's the last link in the chain of causation of chief feature, you could say. Behavior is not chief feature as such. It's just a manifestation of it in the form of behavior. Then another layer is more interior. And this interior layer is the attitudes and the thinking that we are constantly sort of, we're all caught up in a particular kind of thinking based on our chief feature and the way we approach our day, even, and certainly difficult situations. And situations that evoke in us a response that we then turn into a negative emotion is almost always related to this internal mechanism, psychological mechanism, whose gears belong to chief feature. This is harder to see, but by just watching the behavior and not judging the behavior, and then maybe also trying to modify the behavior a little bit, is sort of like not expressing negative emotions. You can learn to modify the expression of chief feature, if you like. And by doing so slightly, it will take you inward. Just like not expressing negative emotions, how we express a negative emotion, that's one thing. But then what's behind that? What's the negativity itself? How does that take shape? What's behind that taking shape, the psychology? And that only becomes visible if we move past the expression, withhold the expression. And then the third aspect, as I think of it and as I experience it, is behind the behavior, the outward behavior, which is physical, and then behind the psychological workings of chief feature, which goes into how we, I think you understand by now, someone with fear goes into a new situation differently than someone with power or dominance or willfulness. Some people attack a situation, some people retreat, some people are very cautious and play it safe. Vanity can do either. It can jump in and jump on the center in the spotlight, or it can kind of wait, sort of check everything out until it's safe, until it can reveal itself, and then it will cautiously start to garner attention from people, something like that. So everybody goes about it differently, but to see this is different. But then behind that, that's the psychological layer. Behind that, deeper inside, is this deep felt feeling of me, just like with negative emotions. And this is also strongly tainted by our chief feature because we haven't known about this all of our formative years. And now we hear about it at some point. And we, of course, believe that this feeling of I is who is doing this work and will awaken or become enlightened as a result. And it's not, this is still in the psychological dimension, this feeling of I, and it has a flavor that's hard to describe, and you have to come to it for yourself. And it's this that we're after. This is what we are wanting to really transcend and escape from, is that deep sense of I. We've believed ourselves to be this feeling of I. And that's not the consciousness of awareness or the awareness of consciousness. And so, but you can't make your way through these layers unless you're just observing quite cleanly. To analyze is to kind of stop. Whenever we analyze, we stop the process. It's like, okay, it's imagine if you're going to see the Grand Canyon and you go along one of the paths and now you see the Grand Canyon in front of you and you stop, and instead of continuing just to see the Grand Canyon, you stop and analyze it. You stop and analyze what you're seeing. When you're analyzing it, you can't see it. You're no longer really observing it. And so analyzing is, when Mihai said pitfalls and what not to do, we have to be careful when we're analyzing. It has to not be a hindrance to clear observation, because then it becomes, another way to say it is, the intellect is too slow to see chief feature at work. And if we're stopping and thinking about all this, we're now slowing down. We're operating at the speed of the intellectual center, and it's the emotional center and awareness itself that have the capacity to really see chief feature in the moment, see it. And first you'll feel it as behavior, and then later you'll start to see it inside, and you still won't be able to stop the behavior, but you'll see that the mechanism inside was at work again. And it takes some time and some real impartial self-observation to not get caught up in seeing it. This is what happens. We get caught up. We identify with our observations of our chief feature and of other people's chief feature. And we even get irritated. We start thinking, don't they know they're in their chief? Come on. And it's someone who doesn't even know anything about these ideas. We'll feel irritated. That's our chief feature, of course, feeling irritated with them. I haven't really thrown out too many tips except a general one of, do your utmost to spend the majority of your time just recording, observing, and not so much time. Analysis has its place. And remember, the manifestation, the visible manifestation of chief feature is just that, the visible manifestation. It is not this thing called chief feature itself, although it's also chief feature. I mean, none of these are separate, but there are layers. And it is, I heard a little bit at the end there where Nicole was talking. I don't know, I'm not sure. I shouldn't misspeak, but it was almost as though what I interpreted from what I heard that last bit was, do you know, we want to change our behavior. And then we get identified with the fact that we can't. This is a big observation. This is big. This is a fourth way, the whole idea of being a machine, stimulus response. We cannot change our behavior in the beginning. And it's very sobering to see this. And this observation also has to be kind of transformed into the realization. It will only change through the light of observation. It will not change with direct effort to change it. There needs to be what the fourth way calls a third force. We don't want to just apply another active force to it, because then we're just caught in it. We're fighting the war on its terms then, you could say. I'll stop there for a minute, Mihai, that prompts something.
Yeah, I really liked how I want to riff on these three layers as we start to explore these ego tendencies. There are 3 layers that we explore. And the most obvious one, the ones that the beginning is the behavior, some kind of way where different feature, different behavior. So the behavior, the action, which could be actual outward action or could be something is happening that we can notice. Something is happening that is compulsive, actually. It comes automatically, it comes quickly in a certain response when they say this. So to develop a taste of that happening to be as an alarm clock, just like this is what happens when we work with non-expression of negative emotions, is that because we have the aim and the understanding, now it should happen soon, that as the inner energy goes above a certain level of intensity, I'm more aware. I'm woken up by the fact, whoa, what's happening? I'm becoming negative. So the flavor of the negativity can act as an alarm clock. The flavor of that behavior can act as an alarm clock, but we cannot have that before we accumulate more recordings, as Peter would say. You record that, you're recording it like you're cleanly observing. Okay, and the second level, so there's the behavior, the happening is one level. Then the second underneath is what you initially said it attitude, but like
Yes,
psychological workings.
yes, the psychological gears, which also can be so fast because they're the emotional centers involved here. This is not just mental gears in the sense of an intellectual gears. It's emotion. We used to say a chief feature is your emotional attitude about yourself. But to me, this only says it's only part of the story. That is true. We each have an attitude, an attitude, I'm kind of interesting person, aren't I? Or, gosh, I'm a bore. Or I'm beautiful. Or, you know what, nobody really likes me very much anyway, because I've got a small nose. Whatever it is, there's this emotional, and we don't say that, of course, to ourselves. There's an attitude about ourself being someone in relation to other people, but also as someone, an identity in relation to events and situations too. As I said, fear goes into the first day of work with an emotional attitude of itself differently than a person with vanity and power. And someone with vanity and power will come in and they're taking over all the conversations the first day on the job, that kind of thing. They're acting like they already know what they're doing. So it's different emotional attitude, and attitude is kind of right, but it's I think more flavor. There's a flavor of I, and this flavor of I is tinged it's informed by chief feature. And chief feature, again, I like what Mihai said in the beginning, it's not a thing. You could think of it as chief influence or chief impulse in us. There's a chief impulse, and it's built into the circuitry of our instinctive center and our emotional center and the other centers too. But those are the two where it acts the quickest. It creates the quickest response in us. And we've learned to kind of bathe in this impulse, this flavor. It's colored our feeling of who we are so much that we can't see it at first. We think, I see my chief feature, I have a chief feature. No, you could even say I is chief feature. Its main characteristic is that it's by no means unique. Once you get to know people, you see everybody with power is kind of interesting, not maybe interesting, maybe not the same. Everyone with vanity is the same. Everyone with dominance, fear, they're all this. It's like seeing the same orange cat, as David Hawkins said. There's one orange cat. There's one dominance, and it just happens to occupy lots of people. There's one vanity, one naivete. And so it's not unique, but we feel it is our uniqueness. And you know what, this, if I may, this connects with one other thing, Mihai. I read in the chat last week about, I think Mike was posing the question, should we ought to be doing what Gurdjieff did, find this thing in us and then deprive ourselves of it so as to awaken? Will that be the means to transcendence? And I would say to this a caution, because the tendency is to read that about Gurdjieff and think what he was doing was stopping the behavior. And then the behavior, by means of him controlling that behavior, he now had a handle on chief feature, and he could sort of transfer all the energy that was normally going into chief feature. He could transfer it into his consciousness. He could take it back, so to speak, into consciousness. But in fact, how I understand it is he was operating at that third most deep inner layer. What he was doing is he was transcending that impulse deep in himself. And he was disallowing, you could say, that to turn into a feeling of I. It was starting to become, I can control people, I can hypnotize people, I can do this, I can do that. It wasn't the behavior that made the difference. It was, he saw it so deeply in himself that when it started, that impulse just started. This is how I understand it. That impulse would just begin to arise in him. He was so alert to it that rather than scratching that itch, which is what it is like, it's almost like that thing that makes you want to light a cigarette, have a cigarette, or have a drink, or eat a candy, whatever. Those things can be fine, of course, in their place. I'm not suggesting they're bad things. I'm just saying there's an itch, a little impulse, and then immediately we jump into it. He was resisting that. He was not scratching the itch of I at its deepest core. And the only thing that can do that, the only thing that can withstand that urge is awareness. And that's conscious will. That is consciousness willing itself to be present rather than to collapse into that feeling of I. Conscious will is not controlling the behavior, because controlling the behavior by itself it'll only lead you deeper into further observation. It won't render you more conscious in and of itself. This is my understanding. So just wanted to toss that out there as a larger part of the conversation.
Hey, so I want to go back to something what you said. So just give me a little bit of space because of these three layers before we go into more. So the behavior, as we notice it better and we catch it, we can resist the behavior a little bit. We cannot do, I mean, initially it's not possible, but after some time, if you're really motivated and have aims around that, you can catch that tendency. There's a tendency and then not doing it. Now we go to the second level, which is like the investigating the attitudes or investigating the psychological working. And here the pitfall is to mentalize about it, to think about it in a normal way we think about things. So that's what Peter was cautioning about it. So we can be in imagination about it and churning about it, some kind of fourth way imagination. So what?
And thinking about trying to change it directly.
So what I recommend here is like we still need to understand its workings. And here it links to my department of this kind of psychosomatic inquiry. We can, in an intentional time or through an intentional process, journaling or with some prompts or some precise questions or with some guided processing that we just done before you came here, to go to find out more about those psychological inner workings and subconscious inner workings, like, okay, what are the attitudes about myself underneath this behavior? What is the attitude towards other people? What am I trying to avoid? What am I trying to protect myself from? What is the utility of doing this? When was the first time I noticed that? Who else in my lineage had this? So there's different now. There's an intentional, conscious processing. So for the purposes of seeing more about it, in the seeing more of it, it kind of releases, as you all know, because it's an awareness-based investigation, it releases. Yeah, so that would be better than to think about it, even to have some, I mean, okay, you have vanity, and then to put some inquiry for oneself. Okay, what is the attitude about myself? What's the attitude about other people? What am I trying to avoid? What is it trying to? It's even you can talk in third person. What is it trying to achieve? What is it trying to avoid? What is it trying to be perceived? So we are opening what's underneath the hood. So that is important work. And then the third layer, that what Peter was talking about, underneath all of this is this me feeling. This me. This is identification. Basically, it's the presence, which is not personal. So the aware being, the impersonal, divine consciousness, sucked into all of this, becomes this me that is feverish or is compulsive or something. So the most advanced work is to notice that, like, this agitated me, and just witness it and see where it is, and be the witness of it, you know. And then it kind of, it's being burned gradually. It's going to burn away in the light of seeing.
And what's going to burn is the identification. I'm sorry, I'll let you finish, but
No, go ahead. It's a good.
I wanted to say another way to look at this. Imagine if we could unplug chief feature, this thing called chief feature, from ourselves. What would be left is, or no, we wouldn't unplug chief feature. We'd unplug the identification, so the impulse would still be there. The person with vanity still feels an impulse related to attention and validation. The person with dominance still feels an impulse to tell other people what to do. The person with power still feels the impulse to jump in and directly challenge or attack or defend. And the person with fear still feels an impulse of kind of uncertainty and hesitancy and but what happens without the identification is none of that becomes a feeling of I. This is what's so interesting. The impulse will still be there, but that's no longer the feeling of I, or less and less there is the feeling of I. This is me. It's just our mechanism. We're each a flavor of something, and without the identification, at least what I've observed is one of the things that happens is there's less and less a feeling of I associated with it. It's not about now me insisting on imposing my identity, a sense of identity, and holding on to a sense of identity relative to other people and situations. And the other thing is that, what is the other thing? I forgot what I was going to say about that. If it comes back, I'll mention it. But mainly this sense that it's like you don't have to impose yourself now on other people such in the same way, nor do you have to protect yourself from situations in the same way. I'm not talking about common sense protection, of course. I'm talking about feeling you can't trust your life. I don't know how to say it any differently.
We can open it to
Yes, please.
That example you just gave, Peter, where you said, if, let's say, these are my words, let's say awareness is no longer identified with a sense of me or a sense of I. So chief feature is still part of having this machine. So there is still going to be an impulse that's some residue tied to the chief feature. But what would that impulse look like if awareness wasn't identified with a separate sense of self? Would it be like just a sensation in the body?
This is my experience, yes. It continues to to arise as a sensation in the body. But because there's no identification, it cannot marry itself to the emotional center. And so this sense of me, we're back to this emotional attitude about oneself, this emotional flavor of me, it cannot tie up to that. It cannot infiltrate that or associate with that, because there's nothing there to let that happen. What usually lets it happen, enables it to happen, is this, what we call identification. And this thing, identification, this is also not one thing. This is an endless study. It has so many subtle and so many extreme degrees or variations. You become more and more sensitive to different degrees of identification in yourself. And what we're talking about, of course, is one of the deepest, chief feature. And so that, yes, there's still that impulse. At least this is how I experience it. But no, it's hard pressed now to become a feeling of I, because there's less and less identification mixed in there. So what you're seeing is there's awareness is now witnessing the human body be affected by a stimulus and start to respond in the most automatic way, which normally left unchecked would form into a psychological feeling of I. But because of there's less identification, it literally can't do that. It cannot form into a psychological feeling of I. And then, as Mihai was saying, this can become an alarm clock. Each time this is felt or happens, it can be an inducement for awareness to recognize, to clarify itself in the moment, even more so to realize itself. Because what is this feeling of I is a mechanical substitute for the realization of awareness. That's really what it is. It's a substitute for the being of awareness. If the being of awareness in you was conscious as itself more often and more deeply, there would be no place and no need for this substitute to occupy that place.